The house stood at the end of Forgotten Lane, a skeletal thing against the bleak, autumn sky. Its windows were empty eyes, staring vacantly into the encroaching woods. Sarah shivered, despite the warm September sun. Something about the place was profoundly unsettling. She'd inherited it from a distant relative she barely remembered, a woman who'd lived out her days in solitary confinement within these weathered walls. A part of Sarah was drawn to the solitude, the chance to escape the city's relentless hum. But as she stood before the house, a growing sense of unease replaced her initial excitement. The property was overgrown, nature reclaiming what was once manicured. A rusted swing set lay abandoned in the patchy grass, its chains creaking in the wind like mournful whispers. As she stepped onto the porch, dry, splintered wood groaned beneath her weight. The front door, swollen with age, resisted her push. It was as if the house itself was reluctant to be disturbed. Inside, a musty scent clung to the air, a mixture of decay and something indefinable, almost sweet. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the gloom. The furniture was a patchwork of styles, remnants of a life lived in isolation. A grand piano, its keys yellowed with age, occupied the center of the living room, a ghostly sentinel in the dim light. Sarah wandered through the house, a silent explorer in a forgotten world. Upstairs, the bedrooms were as empty as the shells of long-departed inhabitants. In the attic, boxes of forgotten belongings were piled high, a treasure trove of the past waiting to be unearthed. As she lifted the lid of one box, a cold draft swept through the room, and for a moment, she thought she heard a whisper, a soft, mournful sound carried on the wind. A shiver ran down her spine. It was just the house settling, she told herself. But as she descended the creaking stairs, a shadow moved in the corner of her eye. She froze, heart pounding. There was no one there, just the play of light and shadow. Or so she hoped. The first few nights in the house were quiet, almost peaceful. The only sounds were the distant hoot of an owl and the occasional rustle of leaves outside her window. But as the days grew shorter, the shadows grew longer, and the murmurs grew more insistent. At first, Sarah dismissed them as the house's old bones groaning in the cooling air, but the whispers grew louder, more human-like, and seemed to follow her from room to room. Her dreams grew darker too, filled with images of ancient rituals and ghostly figures moving through the woods surrounding the house. The more she tried to ignore them, the more vivid they became. Her sleep grew fitful, and her days were filled with a heavy fatigue that no amount of caffeine could shake. Old Man Jenkins was the only neighbor for miles, and his house was almost as dilapidated as hers. He had an unkempt beard and eyes that never quite met hers. He'd been living here his whole life, he said, and had known her great-aunt. His stories about the town were filled with tales of lost souls and vengeful spirits, and he spoke of the house with a tremor in his voice. "It's not a place for the living," he'd say, his eyes darting around the room as if he were afraid of being overheard. One evening, as the sun dipped below the tree-line, painting the sky with shades of crimson, Sarah heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find Old Man Jenkins, his expression a mask of urgency. "You must leave," he whispered, his breath reeking of stale pipe smoke. "The house, it takes people." Sarah felt a cold hand of fear clutch at her heart. Was he just a lonely old man with a penchant for tall tales, or did he know something she didn't? As she looked into his eyes, she saw a flicker of something else, desperation, perhaps, or a warning born of experience. Ignoring his words, she continued her renovations, determined to make the house a home. But the whispers grew more vulgar, the shadows more substantial. One night, as she lay in bed, she saw a figure standing in the doorway, watching her. It was a woman, dressed in tattered clothes, her face a twisted mask of anger and despair. Sarah's screams were muffled by the thickness of the night, and when she switched on the light, the room was empty. The house's secrets were seeping into her consciousness, worming their way into her reality. She couldn't ignore them any longer. She had to know what had happened here, what had made Old Man Jenkins so afraid. Her research led her to the town archives, dusty and neglected. The librarian, a stern woman with a sharp nose, eyed her with suspicion as she requested information on the house's history. After a long, tense silence, she handed over a single book, the pages brittle with age. The title was almost illegible, but Sarah could make out the words, "The Haunting of Thornvale." The pages spoke of dark rituals and lost souls, of a house built upon the site of a sacred grove, and of a curse that had followed its inhabitants for generations. Her great-aunt had been one of the few to survive the house's malevolent embrace, but not without paying a heavy price: her sanity. The whispers grew to a cacophony, the shadows grew hands that reached for her, and the visions grew so vivid she could almost touch the despair that clung to them. Sarah felt the house closing in on her, its hunger for her becoming palpable. The line between waking and dreaming blurred until she wasn't sure which was real and which was a nightmare. The final straw came when she found the basement. It had been hidden behind a bookshelf that seemed to have no purpose until she'd stumbled upon it in a fit of insomnia-induced restlessness. The door was padlocked, but the lock was old and gave way easily. The air grew colder as she descended the stairs, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the damp walls. The basement was small, with a single chair in the center, stained with something that looked like dried blood. In the corner, she found a wooden box, its lid fastened with a leather strap. Despite her fear, she had to know. The whispers urged her to open it. Her trembling hands fumbled with the buckle, and with a sickening creak, the lid lifted. Inside, she found a collection of objects that sent a wave of revulsion through her. A bundle of twigs bound with a string, a small animal skull, and a tattered book filled with pages of scrawled incantations. The house's history of dark rituals was no longer just a tale, it was a chilling reality. The whispers grew to a fever pitch, a discordance of voices that seemed to be speaking in a language she almost understood. She stumbled back upstairs, the basement door slamming shut behind her with a force she hadn't felt. The house was alive, and it was angry she'd found its secret. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the book spread before her. It was filled with the history of Thornvale and its grim past. Each page revealed more about the town's dark folklore, the sacrifices made to appease ancient deities, and the house's role in the rituals. The town had a pact, an agreement to keep the evil contained, and now she realized she had unwittingly disrupted it. The house grew colder, the whispers more demanding. Sarah knew she had to leave, but fear rooted her to the spot. A knock at the door startled her, and she hoped it was Old Man Jenkins with more information, or perhaps even a way out. She opened the door to find no one there. Only a gust of wind that carried a chilling message, whispered so faintly she almost didn't hear it. "You're next?" Panic set in. She had to get out, now. She grabbed her keys and dashed for the door, but it was stuck, as if the house itself was holding her captive. The shadows became more menacing. As she struggled with the door, the floorboards beneath her creaked, and she felt the house shift, as if it were breathing in anticipation. The pressure grew unbearable, and the house's malicious intent was clear. She had become part of its cycle of terror. With a final, desperate pull, the door gave way, and she sprinted to her car, her heart racing. The engine roared to life, the headlights piercing the encroaching darkness. But as she sped away, the whispers didn't fade. They grew louder, more insistent, echoing in her mind as if the house had become a part of her. Sarah knew she couldn't outrun the horror of Thornvale. It had claimed her, and she would never truly be free of its grip. The road ahead was long and winding, leading her back to the very place she'd hoped to escape. The car screeched to a halt, tires biting into the asphalt as Sarah slammed on the brakes. She glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the house looming larger, but Thornvale was gone. Replaced by a dense, impenetrable fog, the road vanished into an abyss of white. Panic clawed at her chest. She was lost, trapped in a surreal, otherworldly landscape. Fear gnawed at her as she tried to navigate the fog. There were no landmarks, no sounds except the relentless whisper of the wind. The car engine hummed like a heartbeat, a comforting rhythm in the eerie silence. Hours seemed to pass, or perhaps minutes. Time lost its meaning in the white void. Then, a shape emerged from the fog, a house, identical to hers, standing at the end of a familiar road. A cold dread seeped into her bones. This couldn't be real. It was a trap, a twisted echo of her nightmare. Yet, there was no turning back. The house beckoned, its dark windows like empty sockets. With trembling hands, she pulled into the driveway. The house was exactly the same, down to the chipped paint and overgrown garden. A shiver ran down her spine as she stepped onto the porch. The door creaked open, inviting her in. The interior was a replica of her home, every detail identical. A sense of déjà vu washed over her, and a growing terror began to consume her. As she moved through the house, the whispers returned, louder, more insistent. They were accompanied by the sound of footsteps, a rhythmic cadence echoing through the empty rooms. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she felt a presence behind her. She whirled around, but there was nothing there. Then, she saw it. A figure standing at the foot of the stairs, a woman cloaked in shadow. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and a chilling aura emanated from her. It was the woman from her dreams, the specter of the house. Terror paralyzed Sarah. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. The woman took a step forward, her eyes locking onto Sarah's. A scream built in Sarah's throat, but no sound escaped her lips. The woman raised her arms, and the house began to shake. The walls cracked, the ceiling groaned, and the floor buckled beneath her feet. Sarah was falling, plunging into an abyss of darkness. As consciousness slipped away, she heard a final, triumphant whisper, "Welcome home." Darkness enveloped her, a suffocating void. There was no sound, no sensation. Just the cold, empty expanse of nothingness. Then, a flicker of light, a distant pinprick in the darkness. It grew brighter, consuming the void until she was bathed in a blinding white light. Her eyes snapped open. She was in a hospital room, the sterile scent of antiseptic filling her nostrils. The rhythmic beep of heart monitors filled the air. A tube snaked its way into her arm, and a mask covered her mouth and nose. Panic surged through her as she tried to sit up, but her body felt heavy, unresponsive. A nurse rushed to her side, her voice calm and reassuring. "You're safe now, Sarah. You had a bad accident. You were found unconscious by the side of the road." Accident? Road? The fog? The house? The woman? Were they just hallucinations, twisted products of a fevered mind? But the fear that had gripped her in the house was still there, lurking in the shadows of her consciousness. Days turned into weeks as Sarah recovered. The physical wounds healed, but the mental scars remained. The image of the woman, her eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity, haunted her dreams. She tried to dismiss it as a product of delirium, but a nagging doubt persisted. One evening, as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across her hospital room, Sarah felt an inexplicable urge to return to Thornvale. It was as if the house was calling her, drawing her back into its sinister embrace. The nurse dismissed her request as a symptom of her trauma, but Sarah was adamant. Against medical advice, she checked herself out of the hospital. The drive back to Thornvale was a blur. The fog had lifted, revealing the familiar landscape. The house stood at the end of the road, unchanged, a silent sentinel watching over the desolate countryside. As she drew closer, a sense of dread washed over her. This time, she was prepared. She was not going to be a victim. Armed with a newfound determination, Sarah approached the house. The front door creaked open as if welcoming her return. The interior was unchanged, a frozen tableau of her nightmare. The whispers were back, louder and more insistent than ever before. She moved through the house with a purpose, her fear replaced by a cold resolve. She found the basement, the heart of the house's evil. The wooden box was still there, its contents undisturbed. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside, she found the same objects, but this time, she felt a strange connection to them. As she examined the items, the whispers grew louder, forming words, a language she understood. It was a language of darkness, of ancient rituals and unspeakable power. The house was alive, a sentient entity, and it was speaking to her. The house revealed its secrets, the history of the place, and the reason for its malevolent nature. It was a story of human greed and desperation, of a pact made with forces beyond comprehension. The house was a prison, a trap for those who dared to inhabit it. With this newfound knowledge, Sarah realized she had a choice. She could succumb to the house's power, becoming another victim, or she could break the cycle, ending the house's reign of terror. The decision was hers to make. Sarah stood in the center of the basement, the weight of centuries bearing down on her. The house's whispers echoed in her mind, a chilling symphony of ancient knowledge. She understood the pact, the terrible bargain made by the town's forefathers. They had sacrificed innocence to appease an otherworldly entity, a dark god of insatiable hunger. The house was its prison, a place of torment for those who dared to inhabit it. A cold determination filled her. She would break the cycle, free the house, and perhaps even the town, from the curse. The house seemed to sense her resolve, its whispers turning to a menacing growl. The floor trembled beneath her feet, and the walls began to close in. With a surge of courage, Sarah raised her arms, mirroring the posture of the spectral woman she had seen. The house roared in response, the air thick with an otherworldly energy. A battle of wills ensued, a silent clash between a woman and a haunted house. Then, something extraordinary happened. The whispers ceased, replaced by a sense of peace. The house seemed to sigh in relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The walls stopped closing in, and the floor steadied. A light, ethereal and pure, filled the basement. It was as if the house was being cleansed, purified. Sarah felt a connection to the house, a bond forged in the crucible of their struggle. She was no longer a victim, but a liberator. As the light grew brighter, Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a sense of completion. When she opened them, the basement was empty, devoid of the darkness that had once consumed it. The house was still, silent. It was free. She emerged from the basement, the morning sun casting long shadows through the house. The whispers were gone, replaced by a sense of tranquility. The house felt different, alive with a new energy. It was no longer a prison but a sanctuary. Sarah stood on the porch, looking out at the world. A new day was dawning, a day filled with promise. She had faced her fears, conquered her demons, and emerged victorious. The house on Thornvale was no longer a haunted place, but a symbol of hope, resilience, and the triumph of the human spirit. But the house had one more secret to reveal. As she walked through the now peaceful rooms, she noticed the furniture had shifted, as if the house itself had been rearranged in the night. In the corner of the living room, where the grand piano had once stood, was a small, ornate chest. It looked out of place, yet it seemed to beckon to her. Her curiosity piqued. She approached the chest and opened it. Inside, she found a collection of letters, yellowed with age. They were from her great-aunt, detailing her own battle with the house's dark past. The letters spoke of the pact made with the town, the sacrifices made to keep the evil contained. Her aunt had tried to escape the house's clutches, but in the end, she had been consumed by the very darkness she sought to expose. The letters contained a warning, a legacy passed down through generations. The house had been a prison for the malevolent spirit, but now that the pact was broken, the spirit was free. Sarah knew she had to find a way to banish it, to ensure it could never harm another soul. With the dawn of this newfound knowledge, she decided to stay in Thornvale. The town needed her, and she had a purpose here now. She would use the house as a beacon of light, a place where lost souls could find refuge. Old Man Jenkins watched from his porch as Sarah worked tirelessly, renovating the house with a newfound passion. His eyes held a hint of sadness, but also a glimmer of hope. He knew the house's secrets better than anyone, and he had seen the toll they had taken. Yet, he also knew she was different, stronger, braver than those who had come before. As the house transformed, so did the town. The fog of despair lifted, and the townsfolk began to speak of the miracle that had occurred at the end of Forgotten Lane. Sarah became a local legend, a symbol of the town's rebirth. But the house was never truly silent. There were still whispers, faint echoes of the past, reminders of the battles that had been fought within its walls. Yet, they were whispers of gratitude, of peace, and of the eternal struggle between light and dark. Sarah learned to live with the whispers, to embrace the house's history and its newfound tranquility. The house was no longer a prison but a home, a place of healing. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the floor, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. The house had chosen her, and she had chosen it in return. Together, they stood as a bastion against the darkness that still lurked in the woods. The house had been a prison, a tomb, and now it was a sanctuary. And as the night closed in, the whispers grew faint, and Sarah felt a gentle embrace. The house whispered back to her, "Thank you." The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The house remained a silent sentinel, a testament to Sarah's courage. The whispers grew rarer, the shadows less ominous. Yet, the house never truly forgot its past, and Sarah never forgot the price of her freedom. One day, as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, Sarah found a single white feather on the porch. It was a reminder of the presence that still hovered on the edge of her reality, watching, waiting. The battle was not over, but for now, there was peace. The house stood tall, a stronghold of hope in the face of fear. Sarah had faced the darkness and won, but she knew the war was far from over. With each passing day, she grew stronger, ready to face whatever the future held. Thornvale had changed, but the whispers remained, a gentle reminder of the eternal vigil she had been entrusted with. Winter descended upon the town, blanketing the woods in a shroud of white. The house, now a beacon of warmth, welcomed those seeking refuge from the cold. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones of the girl who had tamed the monster on the outskirts of town. They brought her gifts, shared their stories, and slowly, the whispers grew softer. One night, as Sarah sat by the fireplace, the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls, she heard it again, a faint knocking from the basement. Her heart raced, but she didn't flee. Instead, she descended the stairs, the light from her candle throwing eerie patterns on the cold, stone floor. The chest was open, the letters scattered. The whispers grew louder, and she felt a presence. The air grew colder, and the shadows grew restless. But instead of fear, she felt resolve. The house had become a part of her, and she a part of it. The spirit that had once tormented her was now a silent witness to her determination. With trembling hands, she gathered the letters, piecing together the story of her ancestors' battle. The pact was broken, but the spirit was still bound to the land, seeking a way to regain its power. Sarah knew she had to find a way to release it, to end the cycle of suffering that had plagued Thornvale for centuries. The town's archives held the key, a dusty tome filled with ancient incantations and forgotten rituals. She studied it day and night, her eyes straining in the candlelight. The words spoke of a ceremony, a way to banish the malevolent force back to the realm from which it came. The night of the winter solstice approached, and with it, a sense of foreboding. The townsfolk had gathered in the house, a mix of hope and fear in their eyes. Sarah stood before them, the tome open in her hands. She recited the incantation, her voice resonating through the room. The air grew colder still, and the shadows coalesced into a figure, the woman from her dreams. The same anger and despair marred her features, but there was something new, desperation. The spirit knew its time was short, and it fought back with every ounce of its being. The house trembled as the two waged a silent war. The townsfolk watched, their breaths held, their eyes wide with terror and hope. The spirit grew stronger, the walls groaning with the effort to contain it. Sarah felt her strength waning, the cold seeping into her bones. But she had come too far to give up. With a final, desperate push, she completed the ritual. The spirit screamed, a sound that shattered the windows and echoed through the woods. And then it was gone. The house stilled, the air grew warm again, and the whispers fell silent. The townsfolk wept and cheered, their gratitude washing over her like a warm embrace. Sarah had done the impossible. She had restored peace to Thornvale. The house, once a prison, was now a monument to her victory. The following spring, as the first buds of new life appeared in the woods, Sarah found a new purpose. The house was now a place of healing, a sanctuary for those haunted by their own pasts. The whispers remained, but they were whispers of comfort, of restless souls finding peace. The town flourished under her care, the shadow of the house's curse lifted. Yet, deep within her, Sarah knew the battle was not over. The spirit was banished, but the house was still a gateway to the other side. And she was its guardian, the keeper of the secret that had bound her to this place. But she was not alone. The townsfolk had become her family, and the house, though haunted, was now her home. Together, they faced the unknown, ready to stand against whatever darkness might emerge from the shadows. For in the heart of Thornvale, there was now a light that could never be extinguished. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, Consider subscribing to stay updated with our latest stories. Give us a like if you want to see more, and drop a comment below to let us know your thoughts.